Welcome to the MSL 411, a podcast designed to equip both aspiring and experienced MSLs with the resources they need to level up their career toolkit. The heart of this podcast is to take the same industry knowledge and advice that we share with our own candidates and make it available and accessible to anyone looking for answers. So if you have questions, you've come to the right place. We're here to give you the 411. And without further ado, let's dive right in.
Hey, welcome back to the MSL 411 podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about the behavioral interview. Interviews that may be explicitly just a behavioral interview, or, it could be an element of the interview focusing on that versus specific skill sets is kind of the heart of what we're going to talk about today. We wanted to kind of talk about this common term that everybody kind of knows what it means, or we think we know, but we wanted to give you guys some ideas to bolster your preparation for this type of interview, the behavioral interview. So our goal today is, companies have these sort of predetermined skill sets that they're hoping to find for a particular position. Maybe they're meeting with their HR person. They're saying, I'm looking for this, this, and this, or my team has this, this, and this. I need more of this. And as you, the HR person, are going out and screening these people before they get then passed on to the hiring manager, I really want you to screen for this set of skills, which could be things like decision-making, problem-solving, leadership skills, motivation, communication skills, interpersonal skills, planning, organization. I mean, there's so many things that they're looking for. There's also, just critical thinking skills, team building, their persuasiveness, which I think is especially important when you're in a outside facing role is, are they the kind of person that can command attention? Do people want to listen when they're speaking? These are all things that they're kind of fishing for in those behavioral interviews.
Yeah, looking for ways that you might behave as a member of their team, how you would respond in certain situations. So this is a very important interview where they can get to the heart of how you operate in your current role or how you would operate as part of their team. So not an interview to be taken lightly, but there are some great preparation tips to make you succeed.
You make a good point. I think people think these screen type calls are not that big of a deal, but that hasn't been our experience. I think our clients are great. I think we work with great people, and maybe that's not a representation of every company out there, but I do think our clients do really take these more behavioral interviews very seriously because a lot of times they're smaller size companies where each individual hire does make a big impact. So these behavioral type interviews are going to be really important because they care about how a team meshes together. I mean, I was even talking to somebody yesterday, and he was talking to us about bringing us on to help with some hiring efforts he's going to need to make this year as he plans to grow and expand his team, and also hire a couple of managers as well. And we were just talking about how, he feels a little bit of nervousness because when he adding this extra layer of management, he really wants to make sure that hire is very much in line with him, with his vision and philosophy, because they're going to be taking over his team and that's his baby.
Yeah. And a lot of times they look at the resumes and the scientific acumen is there, the experience is there, but that emotional intelligence, you don't know whether that's there or not unless you have these types of interviews. So it's going to be super important.
Yes. So what we wanted to do today for you guys, the listeners, is to talk about 4 best practices for behavioral interviews. And then later, we're going to get into examples of what behavioral questions actually look like. Some tangible examples for you guys to have to think about. If this question came up in an interview, how would I answer this? And so I'll kick off the first one, which is to be detailed and be specific. You should have ready a couple of examples, maybe 3 stories. And these are things that were like key moments where you felt like they illustrated who you are as an MSL or who you are in your role. And you should have these stories examples ready and kind of top of mind. You want them to be relevant examples. So, if you're an existing MSL, try and choose examples from your MSL positions or the position you're in currently, rather than those pre-industry roles that you did maybe 7-8 years ago, because those really aren't quite as relevant. And, you've ideally grown and evolved and been developed since that time as well. But if you're somebody who's looking to break into industry, choose examples that highlight skill sets that are similar to a field medical role. So, remember that the interviewer that you are speaking with, they believe, and they are operating under the premise that past performance is the best indicator of future performance. And so, a lot of times we talk about the STAR method. If you're not familiar with it, it is situation, task, action, and result. So you want to set the scene, give the necessary details of the situation. You want to describe what your responsibility was, what the task was for that situation, the action that you took, and how you addressed that particular situation, and then of course what the results were for it. And so having a clear idea, having clear examples of things that kind of touch on all of those points will be helpful for you to have in front of you, and be able to refer to kind of the same examples throughout the interview as well, so that you're not telling too many stories and then suddenly the interview's just drug on because you're kind of all over the place.
Another good tip is to limit your rambling and your tangents. I know you can't always control what you're asked, but you can control what you say in response to those questions. And some people just really love talking about themselves. So this is where you can maybe show a little restraint. Some people don't like talking about themselves so much. Maybe they're a little nervous in these situations and tend to overshare, overtalk, or just keep going. I think it's really important because, like we mentioned, those interviewers are putting you in a real world situation, seeing how you would interact with a KOL maybe. And those are folks who are very busy. So seeing if you're mindful of their time, seeing also if you can answer a question very succinctly and provide the detail that they're needing. So you want to be sure that you don't stretch on further than is necessary. Answer the question. And my next point is just to listen carefully to each question so that you can answer it more succinctly. So if you're unsure of the question that was asked, you can always rephrase it and maybe ask for clarification. So you can say, I just want to be sure I'm understanding. You asked yada, yada, yada. You can rephrase it in a different way and just say, am I understanding that correctly? Yes. Okay, well, great. Let me answer that for you. So it's okay to ask for clarification. It doesn't reflect poorly on you. What would reflect poorly on you is if you don't answer the question that was asked. So if you're unsure, ask for clarification. Listen clearly, listen carefully to each question, and be sure that you recall your past accomplishments in detail so that you can provide a lot of information to answer that question and give them some examples to go on. So that's another great way to prepare. Like you said, have those stories ready. This is when they might come into play. So, listen carefully, think about the question, and then add that example that you've prepared.
Yeah, well, and you make a great point about making sure you actually understand the question, because if you start answering the question, and we've all been in this situation before where somebody's answering a question that you didn't ask or you didn't think you asked, and so you're just waiting for them to stop talking so you could say, well, I actually meant this thing over here. And then they're not really listening to what you're saying because they're just waiting for it to be over so that they can get the answer that they are looking for. And that goes again back to being concise and making sure that not too much time drags on. If this is a phone conversation, you don't necessarily have the gift of being able to see how somebody's responding to what you're saying. But listen for those things that show you they're affirming that you're listening. Maybe they're nodding, like you are now. They're nodding. They're giving you good eye contact. They seem to be in agreement. They seem to be understanding. Those little body language signals that they'll give you will show you that, you've answered the question. Stop talking.
And if you get the sense during the interview from the body language cues, or just even if you feel like, gosh, I've rambled a lot, I've done a lot of talking, they haven't asked a lot I've been doing more talking than they have. That's a good indicator to maybe show that restraint. Make sure you're stopping the rambling, the tangents. Make sure you're allowing them to ask those questions. And then, like we were just saying, listen clearly, answer them concisely, and allow them to get all their questions in.
Absolutely. And repeating the question back to them is a great way to do it. It shows them that you are listening, and people just like that. They like knowing that you're actually listening to what they're saying, especially because we are always multitasking. We have emails coming in and texts coming in and things that are pulling our attention. So when you have that really locked in conversation with somebody where you can tell that they're very engaged and they're repeating back to you and kind of affirming what you're saying, those are the conversations that I think really stick out in people's minds. So yes, being detailed and being specific, so important. Limiting rambling and tangents, and listening carefully to each question. Sometimes if I do notice that I've kind of drug on a little bit or I've monopolized the conversation, I'll say that. Just say, I've been talking a lot. I'd love to hear, more from you. And I think that's just a way to show some emotional intelligence or self-awareness, maybe is a better word, of, I realize that I've been talking a lot and And I think people appreciate that too.
Yeah.
My last one kind of goes with my first one, but practice your behavioral story using real life examples that open the door to talk about what you want to talk about. It's politician 101 is, you are given a question, but you want to answer the question, but you also want to lead into another question. That's how you keep conversation and flowing is, kind of direct the conversation and keep it going. And if you are somebody who maybe will struggle to recall examples, or you get a little nervous when it comes to interviewing, write those examples down and even review your resume. If you have a well-written resume, you should have some examples there. So sometimes seeing those accomplishments or achievements that you had in a different role might trigger things in your memory and jog your memory about something that happened in a past position, or something that happened. Maybe you're 4 years into your role and what you did in your first year has kind of escaped you. But by practicing talking about those scenarios and working through some of the sample behavioral questions that we have here might help jog your memory and help you recall with confidence those past accomplishments that you have to be able to really nail that behavioral interview.
Absolutely.
And we've been talking about ways to nail it, but just a quick word on doomsday prepping here. And how things can go wrong when it comes to a behavioral interview. When you're asked a question, any question really, part of displaying that EQ is foreseeing how your statement or answer to the question is going to be received or perceived by the recipient. And so if you're asking a question such as, why do you want to be an MSL? You're going to, if you're trying to break into the role, you're going to get that question no matter what. And you answer that question something like, well, I like to travel. Well, traveling is part of the MSL role, but it is not the MSL role. Lots of people travel for their positions. And so you may intend for your interviewer to hear, oh, this person doesn't have a problem with the travel piece of the position, which is great. And that's important. But it's not, you need to consider what focusing on something that is more peripheral as far as the role is going to say about your understanding of the role and understanding of the day of the job. So really try and think about how the way that you answer that question is going to be perceived in the mind of the person who's asking it, and where their mind may trail off when you give an answer like that. So that's just one example of a way that something could be perceived differently than you intend. But really taking the time to think through how is this going to be received saves you from people being a little cautious or skeptical about the answers that you've given. So that would be my doomsday warning for our friends listening.
So I wanted to move on and give a couple of examples, like we talked about in the beginning. We're going to go over some examples of behavioral questions and what you might expect in this type of interview. And of course, there are so many different options of questions that you might get asked, you might get thrown for a loop, but you can always prepare for the most expected behavioral questions. And so these are the ones that we kind of hear the most after interviews when we catch up with our candidates and how did it go? That kind of conversation. These are the ones we most often hear. So there are a couple of different topics these fall into. So they may be wanting to learn a little bit more about your communication skills. So they could ask for you to give an example of a time when a coworker or team member criticized you in front of others, maybe in front of the rest of your team. And how did you handle that? How did that event shape the way you communicate with others or with those on your team or with that person? So they just want to know how you handle this complex situation from a communication standpoint. They might ask how you ensure that someone understands what you're saying. So if you're conveying information or delivering a presentation, how do you know that people are getting the data that you're sharing with them? How do you know it's getting across? So that lets them know how you can read your audience and make sure that your communication skills are hitting the mark. They might ask you to tell you about a time where you had to present complex information. This is another one of those real world examples. This is what you do in the MSL role. You present complex data, complex information. How do you do that? How do you make sure you're understood? So give an example of a time when you've done that and how it was received. Tell me about a time where you had to use your written communication skills in order to get an important point across. Not every KOL is someone you're going to meet in person. Sometimes you have to build that relationship via email or via LinkedIn. And so how do you convey the importance of the message you're trying to get across to even get a meeting with that KOL, or to convey information to one of your teammates or one of your counterparts within the company that you work alongside. How do you do that? So they may want some examples of those types of situations. So just thinking about how you communicate as a whole and looking at those types of questions and being sure you can answer, well, this is how I handle this, and this is how I communicate this, and this is how I have handled this situation in the past. And, they really get a better sense of how you would communicate as a member of their team, both with your teammates, with them as your manager, or with your KOLs and thought leaders that you meet with.
Yeah. And they're understanding what your approach is to it,
Absolutely.
which is kind of the heart behind all of it. Next, I would say decision-making skills would describe this kind of cluster of questions. So, give an example of a time where you had to make a difficult decision. Describe a specific problem you solved for your employer. This is a great question. It's your time to shine. How did you approach the problem? What role did others play? What was the outcome? If somebody tees you up with this question, you better hit a home run. This is great. This is a great opportunity to talk about a value add that you made for your company, even though that's not what they're asking for. It is an opportunity to talk about that. It shows how you work with others when you ask, what role did others play as far as decision making goes? What was the outcome? This is a great question. Do it well, friends. Give an example of a time where it paid off to take your time in making a decision. Are you impulsive? I think is kind of the subtext here. Are you impulsive? Are you aware you're impulsive and you actively work against that? Being honest about that is, I'm a quick on my feet person, but I also see the importance of taking time and thinking through a decision and having an example, giving an example that shows your decision-making skills in that setting is excellent because you're honest about who you are, you're honest about your strengths, and you're also showing your awareness of your weaknesses. So I think that's another great question that really gets at the heart of how does this person approach a decision? What is their awareness of their ability to make a decision quickly, or what are some areas that may need some coaching down the line?
A little bit of the critical thinking, how they do handle those types of situations, making the decisions and things like that. Like what you do when you need to make a decision quickly, how do you work through that? So I think these are really great. They may also ask you questions around your initiative, your go-getterness. A lot of people are looking for the go-getters. So they may ask you what you did to prepare for this interview. I mean, that could go a lot of ways. You could have watched their investor call. You could have, devoured all the information available on their website. You could have, seen their presentation at whatever conference they recently attended. It could be any number of things. This is the time to show all the homework that you did to prepare for your interviews with this company. So that will tell them a lot. They could also ask for you to give an example of a situation that could not have been successful without you being there, without your hand in that situation. So this is another little chance to shine, and also kind of allows you to, like you were saying, kind of segue into something maybe you want to talk about. Something that you did on the team that made you shine. Like maybe you were the go-to person for something really specific on your team. And that's the way you can demonstrate your initiative and also show that you were this standout person on your team that did something that nobody else did. So not only does it answer the question, but it also says, I took that initiative and now everybody comes to me for this and I'm the person they talk to. So it kind of allows you to segue into maybe highlighting why you're a special person and what you do that brings that value add to your team and to your hiring manager. So I think that might be another little neat tie-in you could work in there.
Yeah. What's that thing that is standard in your company or standard in your team that you pioneered? That's a great time to talk about that.
Absolutely. And another thing they may want to touch on are your planning and organizational skills. So this is crucial. You are going to be in charge of your calendar in the MSL role. Obviously, you're going to be organizing meetings and taking the meetings that are thrown onto your calendar and planning around that. So they want to know how you handle these situations, how organized you are. So they may want you to describe a situation where you had a lot of projects that were due at the same time. That's not unheard of. So how do you juggle those things? What steps did you take to get them all done? So thinking about your past roles, or if you're trying to break into industry, thinking about how you handled that in your PhD work or in the pharmacy setting, how did you balance a lot of balls in the air at once? And what are the steps that you took to make sure everything got done on time, in order, properly? So, I think that says a lot about how you're going to juggle all the things that are thrown at you in the MSL role, maybe taking on those additional responsibilities, wearing a lot of hats, as they like to say. So it shows that you're able to do that and do it well. They may also ask you how you determine priorities and scheduling your time. So say all these tasks get thrown at you. How do you know which one needs to be accomplished first? Which one can wait until later? How do you prioritize? What's your system? And, maybe give an example of how you've had to do that in the past, where you had these 3 projects thrown at you at the same time. You decided to work on this one first, and here's why. This one waited till later and was still successful, and this is why. So it really allows you to lay out that you have that, again, critical thinking, where you can take what's thrown at you, make it happen, make it seamless, and get everything done the way you need to. So, and in the time that you're given to do it. So I think that's
whatever your method is, because that looks different for everybody.
Absolutely.
I've always really liked like the highlighter method of, okay, green items are, it can hang out on the list for a little bit. Yellow is got to get done, near future. Red is tippy top priority. I've always liked the highlighter method personally, but whatever that is for you, however you organize yourself, they're going to want to understand, a little bit about what that looks like for you and how that could integrate, within their team dynamics. So next I would say is flexibility. Describe a time where you were faced with problems or a stressful situation that tested your coping skills. How did you work through that? Or maybe it's describe a time where you put your needs aside to help out your teammate, coworker with a task. How did you assist them? What was the result? Just trying to understand, this job is, very autonomous in some ways because you're not working in an office alongside your teammates every day, but you are working as a team. And part of working as a team is you have to be flexible. And so they want to know, what does that look like for you? And I think that, when you're early in your career, you have a lot of flexibility. You don't have your preferences in the same way. I know I worked for this woman a long time ago, and she loved to work with people who had never done the role before, back when I was a legal assistant once upon a time. She loved it because she got to train people, or me, to be exactly the way she wanted. And, I think as you move on in your career, you develop your systems and your ways of doing things. And that might not always be compatible with that next job that you're looking at. And so the further you are in your career, the less flexible you may be perceived. Not necessarily true, but it may be perceived that way. So if that's you, you need to think about overcoming that mental block that your interviewer may have and may assume just because of the length of your career. I think that's just one of those kind of real human nature things that you may have to overcome. And so trying to display times where you have had to be flexible in a situation, I think is really valuable if that describes you. Or if you're somebody that is a little bit my way or the highway, and that's something you have to work on, give examples of times when you've been able to do that. So flexibility is huge. Next would be some of those leadership skills. Now that doesn't really apply in a managerial sense if you're not applying for a manager position, but there is just leadership qualities that a person can still have even if they're not leading a team. And so you might see a question like, tell me about a time where you influenced the outcome of a project by taking a leadership role. Give me an example of a time where you were involving others in the decision-making process. And again, that's, how are you managing? That kind of even goes back into the flexibility piece as well, is, how did you manage the situation? How did you maybe rise up to leadership? There's all in any group project situation, there's always that one that rises and kind of manages everything. And so giving an example of how you involved others and engaged others might be something you run into as well.
I think one of the next topics is time management. And for some people, that can be a hard one because some people don't manage their time super well. And so you kind of got to talk about the negatives, and it may get asked that way. Tell me about a time when you failed to meet a deadline. What things did you fail at? What were the repercussions? How did you fix it? What did you learn from that situation? So it is kind of addressing a negative. But I think when you talk about the what did you learn aspect of it, it allows you to take the negative and turn it into a positive. So think about those examples that you might be giving there of, yeah, I failed at this project on a time management front. Here's what happened. Here's what resulted from that. But from that, I learned the next time to do it this way so it would never happen that way again. I mean, that takes a negative and turns it into a positive. On the flip side, they may ask you for a positive example. What is an example of a time when you manage deadlines and projects super well? And what did you do to complete those tasks? And what was your thought process going through that? Give me an example. So it allows you to highlight a time when you used your time management skills really, really well. And so that's your time to shine a little bit too. So be prepared to talk about your time management, the bad and the good, all the nitty gritty there, and frame it in. This is what I learned. The next time I had to do this, I did it this way. I think these have been some really great examples of questions that folks might expect. And I did want to mention that on our website, we do have the resources tab at the very top, and you can click on that, enter your email address to enter, and there is a STAR and behavioral interview tips resource available. So if you want to see this information kind of typed out nice and neat for you, it's a printable download, it's totally free. Be sure and check that out. And of course, if you do have any questions about this topic and want to discuss further or have us discuss on the podcast further about anything, be sure and let us know. There is a link in the show notes below, and we'd love to hear your questions and comments and see if we can tackle some more information on this for you. But thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope you found this really helpful, and we will see you back for our next episode.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to share the link, let your friends know, and of course, connect with us on LinkedIn. And if you want more information on today's topic, please feel free to reach out. Be sure to check back soon as we continue to explore the topics that matter most to you in medical affairs.